In the age we live in, often referred to as the post-religious era, there has been considerable discussion about the ideas, concepts, and theories that have shaped this period. The contemporary age has been described by various names, including the post-secular era, or, in the words of Jürgen Habermas, the post-metaphysical era. Whatever name is assigned to this age is not of primary importance. What truly matters is identifying its overall characteristics, features, and the effects they have on us. Whenever the human spirit of any era manifests itself externally and within history, it takes the form of culture, and culture extends its influence both outwardly and into the depths of the inner self. The great intellectual transition, the move from tradition to modernity, represents a fundamental shift in how humanity views itself. Historically, civilizations were built on religious or metaphysical foundations where transcendence, a connection to something higher than the material world, was central. The traditional individual lived with a constant sense of the sacred. In contrast, modern thought often views these metaphysical foundations as obsolete, contrasting thinkers, Hahn versus Lewis. The text uses two thinkers to illustrate this divide. Byung-Chul Han, a contemporary philosopher who analyzes the transformations of modern institutions. He rejects the possibility of returning to metaphysics or religion, seeing no plausible path back to theism. C.S. Lewis, a 20th century advocate for theism, who actively defended the traditional worldview against the encroaching tides of modern secularism. The abolition of man. Lewis's 1,943 lectures compiled in The Abolition of Man serve as a primary document for understanding the traditional individual's mindset during this transition. Metaphorical eradication. The term abolition refers to the elimination of the human essence that occurs when objective moralities are abandoned. Contextual language. The text notes that the word man in the title is a product of its time. Today, the same concept might be explored under gender-neutral titles, like the abolition of the self or the abolition of the human, to avoid modern linguistic controversy. Culture as an inner force. A key takeaway is that culture is the external manifestation of the human spirit of an era. It acts as an influential force that shapes not just society, but the very depths of the inner self. Therefore, the transition to modernity is not just a change in ideas, but a transformation of the human psyche itself, academic and historical context. Lewis was a scholar of medieval and Renaissance literature at both Oxford and Cambridge. He challenged the narrative of the Middle Ages as dark, arguing instead that the Renaissance was a continuation of that Christian heritage. He identified the true turning point in history as the advent of the machine paradigm, which fundamentally altered human consciousness and created a sense of alienation, a shift from organic connections to mechanical ones. The spiritual journey. Lewis's intellectual path was marked by a significant conversion from atheism to Christianity at age 30, a transition famously influenced by his friend J.R.R. Tolkien. Mere Christianity. He advocated for a focus on shared Christian tenets rather than sectarian divides. The inversion of authority. In God in the Dock, he observed a psychological shift where modern humans no longer feel judged by God, but instead feel entitled to judge God, effectively putting the divine in the dock. The psychology of the self. Using concepts similar to Charles Taylor's, the text contrasts two types of identity. The porous self, the traditional individual who is open to the metaphysical, transcendent, and spiritual world. The buffered self. The modern individual who is closed off from the transcendent, viewing the world through a lens of pure secularism and skepticism. The men without chests critique. A central pillar of Lewis's critique of modern education is the separation of reason from emotion. The head. Modernity focuses on pure intellect. The belly. Modernity acknowledges animalistic urges. The chest. Lewis argues that modern education devalues the chest, the trained emotions that allow the head to govern the belly. Without this intermediary, education produces men without chests who have intellect but no moral character or objective value system to guide them, facing modernity and grief. As a Westerner, Lewis's critique of the post-Enlightenment world carries a unique weight as he speaks from within the system he criticizes. His later work, A Grief Observed, written after the death of his wife, adds a personal layer to his philosophy, showing that his defense of objective truth and faith was not merely academic but was tested by profound human suffering. The impact of educational curricula. The decline of the emotional faculty leads to a society where objective truths are compromised and revealed concepts are rejected. This shift is not accidental, it is facilitated by institutional support. Modernity is spread through educational and social institutions that normalize these theories. Social imaginary. When these concepts become part of daily routine, they shape a society's imaginary, influencing how people live, even if they have never read the philosophers behind the ideas. Mental conditioning. Curricula serve as tools for collective conditioning, shaping the worldview of the next generation beneath the surface of standard lessons. Parallel critiques. Lewis's concerns are echoed by other thinkers across different contexts. Saeed Khalid Jamil has analyzed how children's stories are used as subtle tools for collective mental conditioning. Alan Bloom, in The Closing of the American Mind, 1980s, he examined how university-level education has altered public attitudes and intellectual openness in America. Education as propagation versus conditioning. Lewis argues that traditional education was a form of propagation, where experienced generations transmitted humanhood and objective values to newcomers. Its goal was to nurture nobility and align the student's soul with truth. In contrast, the modern system acts as conditioning, treating the student as pliable material to be shaped by a class of conditioners. The subjectivist attack on value. Lewis uses an example from a textbook critiquing the authors he calls Gaius and Titius regarding a waterfall, while Samuel Taylor Coleridge argued that calling a waterfall sublime is a superior and more accurate response than calling it pretty. Modern textbooks argue that both are merely subjective feelings. The modern view claims that all value statements are merely about the speaker's feelings, not about the object itself. The result: by teaching that emotions are irrational and values have no objective reality, education strips students of their ability to respond properly to reality, leading to the eradication of humanity. The right order of affections. Traditional Western thought never saw emotion as a threat to reason, but as its necessary ally. Plato believed education must produce right responses to beauty and music to prepare the soul for reason. Aristotle stated that the purpose of education is to teach a child to love what ought to be loved. St. Augustine defined virtue as ordo amoris, the right order of affections, where one's feelings are appropriately scaled to the value of the object. Rhetoric. Even Aristotle's model of persuasion recognized that pure logic logos is insufficient without the character of the speaker ethos and the emotional engagement of the audience pathos. The limitation of pure rationality. Instrumental reason alone cannot motivate individuals toward a higher good. For education or persuasion to be effective and meaningful, it must operate at an emotional register. Without this, society loses the capacity for true nobility, becoming a collection of conditioned beings rather than fully realized humans. At one point in the aforementioned book, while distinguishing between traditional and modern education, C.S. Lewis writes, "In a word, the old was a kind of propagation, men transmitting manhood to men. The new is merely propaganda." At the conclusion of the first chapter, by presenting values such as the heart, passion, and emotion as essential components of human nature, he vividly describes the tyranny of modern education. In a sort of ghastly simplicity, we remove the organ and demand the function. We make men without chests and expect of them virtue and enterprise. We laugh at honor and are shocked to find traitors in our midst. We castrate and bid the geldings be fruitful. The failure of utility and instinct. Lewis argues that if we reject the Tao, we are left with only two bases for morality, both of which are insufficient: utility. This fails because it cannot justify ultimate sacrifice. If the goal is usefulness or benefit, a person cannot be logically persuaded to die for a cause, as they would not be alive to enjoy the resulting benefit. Instinct. This fails because instincts are often in conflict. For example, the instinct for self-preservation versus the instinct to help others. Choosing which instinct to follow requires a higher standard of judgment that is not itself an instinct. This higher standard is the Tao. The Tao as the sole source of value. Lewis defines the Tao not as one of many possible opinion-based systems, but as the foundational source of all value judgments. He posits that Tao can develop or be refined, as seen in the transition from Confucianism to Christian ethics, but it cannot be invented from the outside. The critic versus the creator. A critic of the Tao attempts to stand outside it to judge it, which is impossible because they are using borrowed pieces of the Tao to make their argument. A creator or refiner works from within the tradition to improve it. Tajdid versus tajaddud. This aligns with the evolution from within. It seeks to improve, refine, and bring tradition back to its essence. Tajaddud. This aligns with the external attempt to uproot tradition, which Lewis views not as progress, but as the destruction of the moral foundations that make us human. As far as C.S. Lewis's critical thought regarding open-mindedness and liberal thinking is concerned, it is as follows. If a man's mind is open on these things, let his mouth at least be shut. He can say nothing to the purpose. Outside the Tao, there is no ground for criticizing either the Tao or anything else. This final section details the terrifying conclusion of Lewis's argument, the literal abolition of humanity through the total conquest of human nature by scientific and state power. The conquest of human nature. Lewis explains that man's conquest of nature is a deceptive phrase. In reality, every power won by man is actually a power exercised by some men over other men with nature as its instrument. The shift in dominion. Having conquered external nature, modern planners now seek to apply the same utilitarian grip to internal human nature. The conditioners. A small group of man-molders will use irresistible scientific technique and state power to shape future generations. Unlike traditional teachers who were subject to the Tao themselves, these conditioners stand outside all moral law, viewing human beings as mere raw material to be manipulated, men without chests. The central crisis of this process is the destruction of the chest, the seat of trained emotions and sentiments that align the mind with the body. The paradox. Modernity devalues the heart as irrational while still expecting people to act with honor and courage. Propagation versus propaganda. Traditional education sought to transmit humanhood and objective truths. Modern education has become mere propaganda used to condition people into specific social molds. The machine paradigm and post-humanity. The transition from a porous self, open to the divine, to a buffered self, isolated and secular, results in profound alienation. I-thou versus I-it. Human relationships shift from meaningful personal encounters to utilitarian, object-based transactions. Post-humanity. This trajectory leads to a world where human essence is lost, replaced by a post-human existence, where the few control the many through a machine paradigm of thought and action. The final warning, the invisible world. The book concludes with a warning against the modern obsession with seeing through everything. Lewis argues that first principles, the Tao, are the foundation of sight itself. The transparency trap. If you see through everything, deconstructing every value and objective truth, then everything becomes transparent. The result. A wholly transparent world is an invisible world. By attempting to see through the very foundations of morality and human nature, we eventually see nothing at all, leading to the total erasure, the abolition of man.